Hey, Matthias. Good morning from me and good evening your time.
Hey, good morning and good evening, yeah.
Yeah, it's only been a few weeks, honestly, since we just saw each other in Billund in Denmark.
So much has happened since then. I mean, things are going so fast these
Exactly.
days.
And
I'm
I
so glad
think
to see you.
we'll see each other again in Pass in just a few weeks, right?
Yes,
Yes.
Seattle in a few weeks.
I
Can't wait.
yeah, exactly. For people tuning in, there's who are unfamiliar, the SQL Pass Summit, now Redgate, who owns it, but it's probably I've said this on many of my other streams that I'm looking forward to. Definitely one of the largest gatherings of techies and people within the database and data analytics industry. So I have now
Yeah,
officially lost count of just the dozens of people that I am looking forward to seeing or seeing again for the first time in many years. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
same,
It's like
same.
Christmas
Yeah,
for us. We're just getting excited as the dates gets closer.
I mean, the rest of us are flying in 14 hours on a plane to get there, so it must be worth it.
Yeah, yeah. It's just as worth it as me going to Legoland, right?
Exactly, exactly. Yeah,
But
it's going to
yeah,
be a new
I'm
conference in Legoland again this summer.
okay. Like different or not the same one?
Different, yeah. Yeah, same
Okay,
guys are
okay.
arranging a data platform one. Now, also that we're talking both Power BI and data platform today. So there's actually going to be a bit of a, yeah, double take there kind of thing.
And the one last mention on that, the individuals Youst and Asgar who put on Power BI Next Step, which is the conference we're speaking of that was in Billund, they are doing something very novel, which if it wasn't so close to SQL Bits, because I'm going to be in London, hopefully for SQL Bits. I'm also assuming that I'll get my one of my talks or pre-con approved. But if I do, I will be there in
Well,
March, and right afterwards in April, they want to do a Power BI cruise. So it's a
yeah,
cruise ship, like ferry slash cruise ship. That it's a few days that it goes from Copenhagen to it's over in Oslo in Norway, I believe, and back
yeah,
over like a
yeah,
3 day weekend, like Friday through Sunday or something. But during that time, there will be full day workshops on the cruise ship in the conference rooms for Power BI. Like I think this is a
yeah.
world first. I don't think there has ever been a maybe data related, but never a Power BI related conference on a
No,
cruise ship.
it's
Yeah.
such a concept, and I mean, I'm just trying to imagine as an attendee doing training during the days, having the time with all those experts in the night, casually on the same boat. I mean, it's not like everyone is going all other places. The after party
Yeah.
will actually be an after party where you can meet people.
It's a little harder to go back into your room. I mean, you could, but it's like that defeats the
You
purpose. You're
could,
on a cruise ship.
yeah,
Yeah. I dropped the link for the people in the comments. Again, it's really interesting if you're in Europe and you're looking for something to do in April and you want to attend like a weekend conference. The goal for this, I believe, is I don't think there's going to be any 1 hour presentations. I believe it's longer workshop type engagements. Is
yep.
so
So actually,
due to
I
its
met with
nature.
just yesterday, and
Yeah,
he told me it's going to be a bunch of 3 hour sessions. So it's going to be a much more
that's it.
deep dive than we're used to.
Hmm.
But fits the venue. I mean, it would probably be chaotic to sit on a boat and having to go to 7 different sessions in a day.
Yep.
So it seems
So
like
yeah,
a pretty good
less
format.
sessions, deeper dives with each and longer periods. So yeah, I like the idea, but uh, kudos to them for continuing to come up with that. Hopefully the year
Yeah,
after,
it's such
it's
an idea.
if it changes times, I would definitely enjoy presenting one of those. That seems really cool. But speaking of
Yeah.
Houston, I think also as a segue and an introduction on you, I know was it SQL Bits last year that we first met? I think or.
It was actually Power BI next step, yeah, last year.
Okay, so a little over a year ago. So
Right.
next step in 2021.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we met there initially, and I think that was one of your first times presenting, if I remember as well
Was
too. And like and you've managed to have a lot of talks and presentations since then related to Power BI, and
definitely.
it's been cool to watch that for sure. The other thing that I know that we haven't seen for a little bit of time, and something that I know you're spinning up soon is the kind of the handoff of the Power BI quiz that you used to run, and at some point that will be
Yes.
getting stood up as well by you. So I am looking forward to seeing that restart as well.
Yes, yes, and I really look forward to doing it as well. And I actually planned on, I can admit that here, it's a casual conversation. I actually planned on restarting it already back in September. But these months have just been crazy. I mean, if you ask my family, they would probably like me home for a weekend in the near time. I don't think
Yeah.
I've had that for 2 months or so. So
Oh wow, yeah.
looking forward to tomorrow as well. But yeah,
Perfect.
the
And
last year
yeah.
has been a blast. I mean, gotten to know so many great people, including you, Reed. Just met people who used to be my idols that I now see as my peers and can discuss ideas with, and yeah, just learn from each other. And just having the chance to travel around the world and teaching people about the awesome tools we have in Power BI, but also in Azure. Because there's a bit of a segue into my profile, because I started out doing speaks exclusively in Power BI, but since then I've actually ended up working more in Azure and Synapse data stuff, like in my daily life. So sessions like this, where I get to combine those two tools that I love to work with, are just also an amazing chance for me.
Well, and I think it also shows the compatibility of a lot of various platforms that help to work together symbiotically for sure within many of these tool sets. So I know we a couple weeks ago had a very good broad overview by completely. It was Eric and Justin. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Those two did a nice broad overview of Azure Synapse from a more of a business perspective and goal related to that. And now those are going to be we're going to be getting more of a hands-on kind of overview of it today, which I think will be a nice follow-up and evolution of that type of topic.
Yeah, so I've called it Supercharge Power BI with Azure Synapse Analytics, and I did that because I want this to be a session for Power BI developers, not necessarily people who need to know the very bits and pieces about the business value in it, but developers that wants to know how can this actually benefit the data landscape in my organization. How can we do stuff that we may not be able to do with Power BI today? And yeah, just how can they synergize?
Absolutely. But yeah, with that conversation in mind, I will say the one thing is I believe you do need to share your screen though. I don't actually think that you are actively doing that. Otherwise, we can flip over and get started. Oh yeah, you are sharing it. It's just our call. There we go. Yeah, I was seeing myself, so I was thinking not. Yeah, so if you're ready to go, we can flip over and start talking about the conversation at hand.
Yeah, let's do that. And we shouldn't look at our own faces here. Just give me a second, Rick.
Well, we can, but then we get the really fun recursion when I share the screen on itself, and then a black hole opens, and the demons from hell come out of it. So
yeah, this things don't want to minimize for me right now, so that's a bit of a problem. There you go.
There we go. Okay, and then let's get rid of the little chat on the upper right. Okay.
Yes.
Perfect.
Oh my God.
Beautiful.
There you
We
go.
got it. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Before I get started, I just also want to say to anyone else, anyone listening here, that throw in questions along the way. If we can have this as a dialogue, I would even prefer that. Of course, I don't know everything and every corner of everything, so there may be times where I just have to say I don't know, but at least I'll give you my point of view. But I just look forward to helping you supercharge Power BI with Azure Synapse Analytics. So yeah, let's just get started. So we already talked a bit about who I am and like my history with BI and everything. But my name is Mathias Halkjær. Don't worry if you forgot how to pronounce that already now, because most people do. But I usually know what you mean if you try to pronounce the name, so everything is fine there. I'm a principal architect in a data analytics department at a company called Fellowmind. It's a Danish, actually it's a cross-European country working in a lot of European countries with everything data, everything IT, everything Microsoft, but we also have a data department that spans across all these countries. Yeah, so I'm very active on LinkedIn, so anyone who feels like following me or just wants to connect and ask questions, I also try to be very down to earth, taking in everyone who reaches out and answers their questions if they have any. Not doing multiple days free consultancies, but if you have a quick question that takes me 5 minutes to answer, just shoot ahead. I'll do my best. I work with this in my daily life, as I said. I work with all the data platform tools for Microsoft, Azure Synapse Analytics, Azure Data Factory, Azure Data Lakes, Power BI, all the streaming data services as well. And I have a team behind me that does everything else that I may not have touched upon yet. So life is good. I also have a blog called Flux BI. I mean, you can check it out now. It's a bit sparse on content. It has 2 blog posts only, and one of them are actually not a data post. It's a PowerPoint tip. So, but I'm working on getting more content in the following weeks and months. That is.
You always have to start from 1, right?
Exactly.
Arrays always start at 1.
I started from 2, and then it took a bit too long to get that third post out. But I do have some drafts that I'm very excited about. I have one about how you can. It fits the topic of today. We're not going to talk about it, but it's how you can actually leverage your Synapse platform to do more advanced refreshes in Power BI. So much more granular fine control of how and when you want to refresh, and more importantly, synchronize that refresh with your backend stuff. But that one is complex enough to warrant its own session. So I can come back and talk more about that if you want someday. Read. Yeah, that was one of them. And at the top of the head, I don't remember what the other draft was, but also a pretty interesting technical deep dive thing that a lot of people sometimes struggling. Oh yes, it's loading in the security groups. Who's member of the security groups in your Azure platform? That's often very important for knowing who actually has access to your workspaces in Power BI. So again, the things start overlapping and intersecting. So yeah, definitely I look forward to finish those so you guys can get the benefit of them. Yeah. But we're not here to talk about me, not anymore at least. We're here to talk about these 2 guys and how they work together. So if those who doesn't know, left one is Synapse Analytics, the other one is of course Power BI, and how they work together. But when we talk about supercharging Power BI with Synapse Analytics, it's maybe a bit of a stretch, because this session is maybe also more about how we leverage Azure together with Power BI. Synapse is just the specific tool, but as you'll see later, it's actually a toolbox rather than a tool. So again, how do we leverage Azure with Power BI? But let's start from the Power BI side of things. Because this session is intended for people working with Power BI, people who may not have even looked at Synapse Analytics yet, or people who are curious about it but just wants to know a bit more. But the session is made for people who know Power BI. So I want to start from the starting point in Power BI. So let's talk a bit about how we would do end-to-end analytics in Power BI today. So I've sketched out something here at home. So this is not a strange concept to you either, I assume, Reed. But that you start building some reports. That report has some sort of model and you can share this in your service. So you kind of cover all those areas of modeling your data, visualizing, getting those insights, and then finally sharing them with the people who needs to see the data at the right time, at the right place. So I think this is the very power of what Power BI does. It really brought this democratization of I usually call it front-end analytics. So like the front end of data into the hands of those citizen developers, those end users who can now just make these things themselves. So everything is great in a sense. And of course, this illustration is a bit simple. I think you would be the first one to also point out that maybe the data set should be disconnected from the report and have multiple reports as a possibility. Definitely. Golden data sets is definitely a standard, and if you get to that point, you'd actually have quite a powerful end-to-end analytics setup in Power BI. But I would also say that you have some missing pieces. Some missing pieces that are kind of let out in this image. Because if we take like a regular enterprise data pipeline structure, you'd actually have a bit more of steps involved to handle some of these steps. So there's the whole ingesting data. There's the step where you clean data. There's the step where you make data available to other services. And then from there, you'd start model that data to your end, your front-end BI tool for sharing those reports. And so we have something here that I'm missing. We did only have the dataset capabilities. We didn't have a proper way of ingest. Yeah, we can do it in the dataset, but we have to squish all these operations into one. I'd argue you can do all of those. You can in the ingest data. I mean, that's what the whole connectors are for. You can clean data. That's what Power Query helps. Curate data is a bit harder because you don't really have that endpoint, or at least we didn't have, because I know new things have been happening in the recent years. So there were these gaps, and of course, people other than me, probably also people working at Microsoft, also recognize some of these gaps. So they have been working on them. I'm not saying they're working from the model here I created here. They have their own roadmap, their own vision. But I just feel these are the gaps that I've been missing from Power BI from when I started working with Power BI. But they have been doing stuff. Oh yeah, and another limitation is that sharing of the reports is still locked into this one specific tool. So if you really want to blast this out to different departments who maybe doesn't have Power BI yet, or people using other BI tools, that is a bit locked down. But then we had data flows, and that kind of changed the game. And then it didn't completely yet, because it only gave us one step. It gave us a means now to make these curated data objects. So where data flow really have to reside here in the big pipeline, I cannot say for sure, but somewhere it solves some of the issues, but not all of them. But it solves some of them. We can now have like a customer dimension that can be shared across different data sets. We can have these building blocks. Another thing was also added, the possibility for data sets to connect to themselves. So the whole, people used to call them composite models. I think the correct term is direct query for something Power BI. Maybe you remember it.
Direct query for analysis service, direct query for Azure analysis services and Power BI data sets. Like DQ,
Right.
like it's this long for the acronym. It's or you could just say composite models against tabular.
Yeah.
Nice and easy.
Yeah. Usually people recognize.
Microsoft is horrible at naming. Don't quit their day job to start becoming a professional namer.
Is especially hard.
Yes. No, it's one of the longest names that they've ever had for like a product feature.
Yeah, definitely. So we had that. So we have the capabilities now to do some of the steps. We can create data sets that can be reused in other data sets, and we're starting to get to the point where we have some pretty neat building blocks in Power BI, and a lot can be done. And we even have had the REST API, who now also allowed us to utilize the data from our data sets outside of Power BI itself. So you can have an application of sort, call that data set, query it through the query execute query REST API. So slowly we're getting some of the functionalities that may be missing. And then we also had this completely new kid on the block, the data mart. And the data mart is interesting because if you'd asked me half a year ago when that one was announced, I think I actually blasted out on LinkedIn that this whole thing now is not a problem. We can do end-to-end analytics in Power BI, and I think it's on the right track, but it's kind of limited. I think that's fair to say, isn't it? Limited in functionality as it is today.
Yeah, and Microsoft often. Microsoft has a few different times released a feature which is like, this is the best thing since sliced bread, which can get there in 12 to 24 months, but it's not necessarily there today. The biggest one for this is if you want, I love the analogy of almost like baby's first database. Like, it's the company that, maybe has kept stuff in flat files and Access and all these other places. It's great to be able to just, snap your fingers, turn on a database that is an Azure SQL database that has SSMS connections, because it does not have write back from write capabilities from SSMS or anything else where you can't just add views and other stuff. Until it has the actual ability to do normal database stuff, stored procedures, that's when I think it will truly be an actual like enterprise level grade. And then maybe if you want to move it over to Azure, but when those come out, then I would say yes. Like if you need structured data in a stored location, please go from flat files in OneDrive into this. But that's that missing component for me is write back outside of Power BI.
Definitely. I really love the way that, and I know that he doesn't necessarily want to be quoted for it, but that Matthew Roach called it data flows with benefits. I really think that that's the role that it can have today, but I also see a potential in it becoming a lot more if they decide to invest more features into it. Like it seems obvious, as you're saying, some of these database capabilities, if it gets that, we are really on the right track for self-service data platform for these small use cases. Like
the last digression I'll just make on that is the fact that it basically spins up an auto-generated tabular model on top of it. I have heard from multiple people like, oh no, you can make tabular models now in the service, and like. No, all it's doing is it's just creating an auto-added tabular model based off of the unstructured data or uncompressed data that is in that, and that's where you write a measure. Like, you're not actually writing a measure against the data mart. It is against an existing one into there. So, like, I think there's been a lot of confusion. Like, you're building a tabular model, right? No, you are basically an advanced data flow, which is just a more structured database in the service. And they just decide to auto-link a built-in tabular model to it, so you can actually ingest data into a report, because technically, reports work best with a tabular model. But I think that ambiguity of what's happening in the backend has confused a lot of people of what exactly this is in the service. So I'm hoping moving forward they make it more clear on what's happening where, and that like the fact that two separate things are basically being spun up when you create this, an actual data storage in Azure and an associated tabular model that just exists and is always going to be attached to it by default.
Totally, and I agree. I mean, I did a session on data mart at Power BI Next Step last time you talked about. I was even confused the minute up to doing the presentation. I mean, it makes sense what it is, but what it's used for, there are some use cases, but that broad use case of bringing democratization of the data platform handling into Power BI, it's not there yet. I don't think anyone claimed it would be either, but that's what I had hoped for at least. So let's move on from there, because it's not a data mart session, and we need to fair get to stuff. But we got this one bit of the puzzle. We got the SQL endpoint, which added the capabilities of reusing it outside of Power BI. you can have a data mart now, getting some data in through Power BI, and use that as a source for some other system through that SQL endpoint. So at least there's that. And we can dream that somewhere in the future, we get these capabilities, that we can create separate layers, do transformation, create views on views, and have some sort of logical structures in that data mart, or even across different data marts. Yeah, but we're not there yet. So there's still a need for Synapse, even for, I would argue, even for smaller customers that may think that Power BI is the one and only for them, because it's obvious to me that if you have these medium-sized, larger companies, well, then utilizing some of the Azure services becomes a bit of more of a, it's clear why it makes sense. But for smaller customers, which I also think is the big users of Power BI, they may get some inspiration from the rest of this session now. So a bit of a teaser. So, what are the limitations? If you ask me, I would say there is this out-of-sight transformation layer going on in Power BI. Yes, you have the Power Query engine that can do everything, but it's squashed together into one big operation, and you're not really seeing the steps of what's going on behind the scenes, which also means it can be sometimes hard to troubleshoot and really control and audit that after the fact. Then you have this unmaterialized staging, which I think is one of the bigger limitations, with no historical data. I know there are, I would call them hacks, but there are hacks where you can use incremental refresh and then kind of create an artificial historical data thing. But the problem is, the moment you accidentally wipe out that history by some error happening in your data flow, or you accidentally do a hard refresh on it, well, then you kind of back at square one anyway. So I think that historical data right now isn't solved for Power BI. Then there's no great ways to log and output your data cleaning. So in a bigger platform, you'd want to have processes for, we're getting some crappy data in. We want to actually trigger some alerts and warning and have people do some action based on that data. So we don't necessarily only need to act on data when we have good insights for them. Sometimes we need to act on crappy data entering our systems, because we all know crap in, crap out. Isn't that how you say it?
Garbage in, garbage out, basically. Yeah.
Okay. Let's keep it more. Yeah. Garbage in, garbage out. So let's keep the garbage out. That's easier if you can have logs and quality checks and stuff that will trigger actions based on it. And then we have finally one of the more important ones also. It doesn't really handle humongous data very well. And I call it humongous data because everyone called it big data, and no one knows what big data is. And I have so many people coming up to me saying, "Hey, we have big data, and we're not sure if Power BI is suitable." But then it turns out they have maybe 3 gigabytes of data, and that's really not big data. So for really, really big data, that can become a problem in Power BI, and there you need other tools to handle that backend for you. Yeah, so I called the session Supercharge. So how do we supercharge? What are the benefits from using something else than Power BI, from the benefits of using Azure Synapse on top of Power BI? I would say, first of all, I mentioned it before, time travel. So historical data and change tracking in your data. That is something that is cumbersome and not really solved in Power BI, but it is, I wouldn't call it easy, but less complex, more possible in Synapse. And then we have supersize. And supersize is, of course, the massive scale of handling this humongous data I talked about before. And we have, I call it the reflection skill. So you guys must all have heard of this hype term, reverse ETL. So basically meaning we want to get data out of our analytical systems again, And there's a bit of a back and forth discussion going on about, do we really want to have operational data together with our analytical data? And it's almost a religious belief of people saying no and yes and back and forth. But at the end of the day, this is something that companies want to do, and it's something that clients are asking for. And it's something that we need to recognize as something that should be possible. And we've thought with data marts, we can do some of it now. I mean, you could call it reverse ETL, that you can pull out SQL data from a data mart. So maybe this one should have been a bit gray and not that, but it's there. Azure Synapse does that kind of almost out of the box. Then I also call it multi-power here because Synapse supports multiple programming language. And that can be a huge benefit if you already have an organization that are confident with working with Python and SQL. What are the other languages? Scala. I think only the very big organization have good Scala developers. But if you have these other programming language and if you have developers who know and use them, well, then you suddenly have this case where you can solve the task with the best tool instead of having to solve everything with Power Query. Because Power Query is excellent, but there's definitely also some jobs that other programming languages can do better, or some other tools can do better. I call it hypercognition because there are AI capabilities in Synapse that Power BI doesn't have, at least not yet, and having that AI-ready data exposed for your AI models, well, that just makes sense to have in a platform that it is ready for those kind of purposes. And then the last one, I call it here regeneration. So I actually added this to the slide, but there's becoming more and more work on this in Power BI, but I still think there's some way to go. So you have in Synapse, you have better integration with DevOps, with GitHub, and you can control what you're developing. You can control which changes you're making to your tables and your data structures and your overall enterprise data model. And with DevOps and other DevOps-like tools, with these CI/CD processes, you have the option to roll back changes that were bad or caused bugs, and you have the possibilities to have that three-layered environment where you have a development layer, a testing layer, and a production layer, and you can catch these errors before they even push to production. Now we have a bit of that in Power BI Premium, and we also have a better and better integration with DevOps in that deployment pipeline in Power BI. Mm-hmm. But again, like the others, you don't have it to the full extent. It's always a bit of the term again, a bit of a catch-up. DevOps is making something available, some features, and you can almost use those natively in Synapse because it's a code-based environment, and Power BI needs to develop those features after the fact and make them work. So there's a gap there as well, which I personally would love to see. I mean, full-fledged version control in Power BI would also be so amazing. But at least we have deployments pipelines these days. So what is Synapse, Azure Synapse Analytics? So out of the box, and what I think most people are confused with in Synapse Analytics is they don't understand what exactly the tool is. And I think it's kind of the same dilemma we're having with data marts. What exactly is this tool? But for Synapse, for Azure Synapse, I believe some of the confusion is that people expect it to be a tool. But in fact, it's actually a toolbox, including a bunch of tools. You have the data lake automatically created when you create a Azure Synapse workspace. And if you don't create it, then you have to link it up to an already existing data lake. So you have that inherent data lake already there when you first deploy it. Then you have the serverless SQL pools. You have dedicated SQL pools, so actual physical data warehouse SQL. I won't call them databases because it's going to confuse, but actual SQL data warehouses. Then you have all the capabilities of well, I added Databricks here, but well, really the Spark language and Synapse Spark and everything you can do there with notebooks, and you can suddenly use PySpark, which is a Python-based Spark interpreter. You can also use Spark SQL, so Spark SQL, doing SQL in your notebooks, and it just opens up new very structured ways of transforming your data and controlling what's going on within your data platform. Then you also have mapping data flows, which is an cloud version of what is formerly known as SSIS, SQL Server Integration Studio Services. I don't remember. SSIS, everybody calls it SSIS. So that is a UI-based drag and drop data transformation tool within Synapse. We have Synapse pipelines, which are great for ingesting data. And finally, we have the Synapse links, I should say now, because there's more than one these days, where you can quickly link up to some of the most commonly used bigger services within the Microsoft platform. So today we have a link for Cosmos DB, we have a link for Dataverse, and we have a link for SQL databases. I think that it only works for the newest one though. But yeah, so there are links out of the box. So we have all these different tools, and we have much more. There's stuff I forgot to add here. There's stuff that didn't need to be here, but there are a bunch of tools. You can create these integration runtimes where you can connect to on-prem data. You can create, there are lots of other tools, and it really is a toolbox. And I think the biggest hurdle I run into when I talk to organizations who may be interested in Synapse is that they almost always disregarded it because it was, quote unquote, too expensive. And that always annoys me. I don't know, have you worked with Synapse before, Reed? Do you have the impression that Synapse is expensive? I'll just answer it myself. But
I was just going to say, sorry, I was on mute. There's always a cost to any of these items. It does come down to, though, what is it saving you in time or an effort in terms of automation? That kind of, it's the ROI, right? Like, yes, you might be paying an extra, few hundred a month or whatever it might be, but what cost savings is this for freeing up time for employees or reducing what roles are necessary? So like I think that's where it comes down to. And with a lot of these features, yeah, it is more money, but I do think that most of the time when properly configured, there's a huge payoff in the value add that it has and automation and time saving for an organization.
Definitely. And what I mostly find out is that when I ask people, where do you get that from? They say that they went to the online calculator and that told it was going to cost X amount of a lot of money. And the thing is that pricing calculator that has every single service in the toolbox switched on per default. So of course it's going to seem like it's going to cost a lot of money because everything is turned on. But the thing is, when you create a Azure Synapse workspace, and I really wanted to emphasize this point because I think it's important for people to know. When you create an Azure Synapse instance, it costs you exactly $0 per month. Everything is turned off, nothing runs, there's no baseline cost. So if you're ever scared of some calculator telling you that you have to pay, I don't know, hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of dollars per month just to get started, that's not the truth. When you start, it costs $0. And then you start using some of the services. Then you start using the tools in the box. And this is a cloud service. So you pay for those tools, not per month fixed price like we used to in Power BI or per user. We pay for the consumption. So when something runs for half an hour, we pay for half an hour.
Yep.
Something runs 1 time or 1,000 times, we pay for 1 or 1,000 times. So it's a much more fine-grained pricing model. And we can use that for a benefit because we can control then, if we think cleverly about how we design things, we can also keep them not costly. So if you ever want to just this pricing, I'd say don't try to estimate too much upfront. Do a proof of concept, check the pricing, then expand to a bigger data set or a bigger use case or something like that, so you have a better understanding. Because if you try to estimate upfront, you're either going to overshoot or estimate too low, and in both cases that's going to go bad. So yeah, proof of concept is a good thing, and you can set up Azure budgets and cost alerts, so you're never surprised of the actual spending that you're doing there. So that was a bit of the tools and the pricing. So what exactly is internal analytics then in Azure Synapse? Well, we have kind of the same pattern as in Power BI. We have tools for ingesting the data. We have tools for cleaning, transforming, and curating this data. And we have storage platforms like the data lake and the dedicated SQL pool. And we have this orchestration platform in the pipelines running in the background, making sure that things are run when things need to be run. Mm-hmm. And we actually have visualization components also in Synapse. I mean, anyone with a Power BI background is going to laugh them off, but they're there to Power BI can do quick, small visualizations in Synapse as well. And well, we can do visualizations through code. So you have the whole range of tools available to you that you can do in, for example, PySpark or stuff like that, which can also do visualizations. So just as Power BI, we can actually do a lot of end-to-end stuff with Azure Synapse. And then we also have some other tools that fit into the whole thing. But we are running a bit short on time, so I think we should take a look of how does it actually look? How can we ingest, how can we pull in some data through a Synapse platform? Also, so someone out there who haven't seen it before, get a chance to see what it's all about. Sounds good?
Perfect, let's do it.
Yeah. So, I need to get in a screen here. There you go. So I already went through the hassle of creating a Synapse for us. But I also want to say that if you have a company where they're bit open for you creating these things yourself, that's usually in smaller companies, and you have if you have the permissions to do this yourself. It took me about 5 or 10 minutes to create this resource. So it's not a multiple day project, but it can become if you are in a big organization and things needs to go through a whole hierarchy of people you need to talk with, of course. But to get started with a quick proof of concept, you should be able to get running very quickly. And if you are behind that organization with those kind of hurdles, you can sign up for maybe some free credits with Azure, create your own little test instance and do it yourself. And then you also should be able to get up and running within a few hours or so. So this is the main page. There is again a bunch of tools, and I would love for us to go through all of these tools, but I think for that we would have to do more of a specific like Synapse 101 deep dive session. Definitely not something we can do in the next 20 minutes. So I'm just going to pick the most essential tools. So if you want to get started creating some sort of mini data platform in Synapse, you start with these integrate tools, which are great for pulling in data. So I have a backup here we can look at if we run short on time, but let's try to see how it looks from scratch. I create a pipeline here, and a pipeline is used to pick in data. It's much similar to what you would be used to from well, probably data flows is the closest one, but Power Query in general. And we can use some different activity tools here, which come with all their own. It's the different features you can use for different purposes. And we want to copy data, so we can use the copy data tool. And the tool kind of helps you along the way. So you need to apparently create some sort of data set before you can pull in data. And if you don't have that already, it even offers you, well, just create it. And you can go and say, well, my data is on a SQL database. We just call it Supercharge here to save time. And then you need to create some sort of link service. And if you don't have that either, well, it will still have this button for you to just click and create it. And then suddenly you are in almost a rabbit hole of creating stuff within creating other stuff. But it actually helps out. And you will be able quite quickly to create something that makes sense. So for example, here connected to my AdventureWorks database, add in the information, server name, database name, everything, authentication. And once all that is in, then you have this link service. It will be connected to the data set that you were creating before, and everything kind of rolls up into this copy data. But I already did this work for us. So I have here an AdventureWorks data set. Now the AdventureWorks data set is configured within the data set here to have parameterized schema and table. That means that I can I add these variable parameters, and parameters from Power BI, and I use them as my lookups, and that means I can reuse the same data set for different tables. I could even parameterize the database if I wanted to. Can't always recommend to do that, but yeah, it's even possible. Theoretically, I think you can even parameterize which server you connect to, but that's definitely not something I would recommend. So you can copy the data here. We can add, if we need sales order header, and we can choose similar fashion to sync it somewhere. And I can create here, I want to sync this to my data lake. So I just choose data lake, continue. Sorry, were you asking something before? Wait, I just heard you.
No, just making a comment.
Oh, cool. And here you choose which file format. So the data set also contains information about which format you will save in. I mean, you could pick something familiar like a CSV file. It could be fine for proof of concept if you just want to be familiar with it. But I definitely recommend to get used to working with Parquet files, because they are the essence of modern data platforms. Yep. So Parquet file is a good format, and then again link service, and that is actually created for us, because again, the advantage of having this toolbox is that the tools are kind of already connected together, and you get this synergy of having that connection done for you. And within that data lake, I need to define then which container, what folders, and what name my file should have. And again, I can parameterize all these, and I probably should, so we can change them. And I can go here to open dataset and start creating the parameters and add them here, here, and here. And then I'll have the same thing with my data lake. And again, I already did this work for us beforehand. So we have here a Parquet landing thing where I can define which container, which directory. We can call it here Supercharge. And the file name is sales order header. Now, for when you start to not just do proof of concepts or do this in real life, you would look into parameterizing also the table names you're connecting to, and also the names where you're saving it. So effectively, you could have a lookup getting you the table names, and then looking up through those tables, and then saving all those tables with different file names in one big operation. So if you feel it takes a long time to set up one single activity to copy one table, just keep in mind that setting up an activity that will copy all your tables, that's going to take maybe 10% more time, because you just need to parameterize the whole thing and then done. And you have one thing that can copy your whole database in very quickly. So that's pretty cool. But right now here, we will of course just do it a bit manually. So we have here 3 copy activities that will copy the data, and I can always debug these if I want to see what happens. And then we get this interface down here where jobs are going to be triggered. Customer, sales order details, sales order header, and they are being copied, and it'll take a bit of time. There's a few thousand records in each of them, so it takes a few seconds. And then you have data in your data lake. And a quick tip: when you run a pipeline like this, you have this debug run consumption. These numbers tells you how much it costs, but unfortunately you need to go and check up the prices and then calculate yourself. But just for reference, whatever happened here is way less than a dollar. It's a few cents or something like that, maybe 20 cents. No, yeah, I don't know. But anyway, you quickly get a feel of what these numbers mean in terms of pricing. If you get the habit of checking them once in a while, then check the prices and calculate. Definitely big data volumes, that increases the price. If you're having a job where you run through thousands and thousands of tables, that will also increase the price. And more importantly, if you run then something every second, then you may have a bad surprise because these prices are usually fair when being run maybe each half an hour or each hour or even once per day, even better. But once you get to that near real time jobs, they can be not crazy expensive, but something you should be aware of. Good. So we have data now in the data lake, and since everything is integrated, we can even go and check out here our linked data lake. So under the data tab, we have a list here of our linked stuff, and one of them is the data lake that is linked to our Synapse, and we can check here the sandbox container where we save stuff, and you will see a folder here called Supercharge, and that folder was recently updated with, oh yeah, the hours is not going to make sense for you guys, but this is the time here from 2 minutes ago. So we had these files now in the data lake, and you won't be able to see it just from the numbers here, but they're heavily compressed by the Parquet file format. So whatever cost there is per terabyte in the data lake, you usually end up paying less than you expect because it's being compressed, and the price is almost it's very, very cheap for storage. It's one of the big benefits of the data lake. So we have data now in our data lake. That was the first step of the whole end-to-end analytics thing. Now we want to connect to it. So I'm going to do a bit of pre-cooked stuff here for you guys, so we don't, so we have time to go into the Power BI part of the whole thing. So we can we can use this SQL format to connect to files in our data lake. We can connect to a single file, or we can connect to multiple files, and then we can convert it into a view, or we can convert it into a external table in our serverless SQL database. So I run this query. I've already did it, so it's going to give me an error if I run it again. And that is going to allow me to check the serverless SQL. It has these 4 views. And I can even go here and query those, run a top 100 on it, and it's going to start up the services and bring me back the data. So here I have the data from the customer dimension. So I can query my data now, and I can query it like any other SQL. So I can even also do stuff like let's do a quick left join. We'll just left join on the sales order details. No, sales order headers. Then I'll show you how you can visualize stuff here. So we'll left join on the sales order header. There you go, and there you go. And then we can make some sort of aggregate here, where instead of seeing the customer ID, I don't know why the name is not in the data set. It must be a adventure work thing. So we just check the account number, and then we do a count of the sales order header and try to see how many try to see how many sales orders per account. Right. This should work. Hope. Yeah, of course. Customer. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, that should do it.
There we go. Excellent.
Okay. Not
Well,
the best
we
example.
returned something.
Return something. Okay, if this had any data, you would of course have seen a simple line chart. You could have seen like a bar chart, area chart. Apologize for the bad formatting here. Pie chart.
It is nice that it can generate visuals on top of the data, just if you want to take a quick glance at any of the distribution or create some kind of a histogram or anything else.
Yeah, and we're used to working so much visualizations that we sometimes forget that other users in the organization may not need the fancy, very polished reports, but may just need to quickly run a query on our data, get a quick something, scatter chart or a bar chart, and then save it as an image, and then be done with it, have that, send it to their boss or something like that. So exactly. Definitely some value in this. Even though it is very, very simple in its way. Here we say, we can visualize data in Synapse, but there's also integrations with Power BI. Now we're getting to the good stuff, and I will make sure that we go at a reasonable pace because I know that we are a bit short of time. So
we can cover. So don't worry too much about that. If we go a bit over, that's no problem. If we get to cover a few more things.
Cool. We can cover a few more things. So
excellent.
Just as you could add databases as your link service, you can actually also add Power BI workspaces as link services with a special functionality. The easiest way is to go to the front page these days, because there's just a click up here that brings you to, do you want to do something with Power BI? And you can click that one. And it will actually, oh, I already created a workspace, so now this behaves differently. Oh, I should have known. So again, we can click a link service, and in that link service, you can choose Power BI. And then you get the option here of choosing some sort of workspace, and you can add that as a link service. And once you have that, it's here. I created it beforehand. Under develop, you will actually see now here that there is a Power BI tab. Now, sometimes it doesn't appear immediately. Refreshing your browser may help, but it should appear. And now I can actually browse this workspace, this Power BI workspace from within Synapse. I can even go and check how do the different report looks. So I can check this actual report that doesn't work, and then this other one is blank, but you can check the reports, and here's a report with Lego bricks. And the cool thing, if you ask me, Reed, and is you can actually edit the report as well. So if you want to do a quick change, and from within Synapse, you can actually edit it and save, and it's pushed back to Power BI. Well, it is embedded Power BI, so it is Power BI. But yeah, you can edit reports from within Synapse, and you can even go and say datasets. I want to create a new Power BI dataset. It also helps you with that. It isn't that as helpful for datasets. It just asks you to install the Power BI desktop program, of course. But it actually does something helpful in the next step. Because the next step, you can choose your data source, and then when you click continue here, it will give you an option to download a template file for Power BI with that data source already in it. That's pretty cool. I already prepared it here, so we can try to open it. And everything should kind of start to fit together, because this source I chose, that's the serverless server we just created some views on, and we tried to to query, and it's connecting to the source. Of course, there's a matter of authentication here. So if you don't have access to that serverless resource, you will run into problems here. But since we do, we have our data. So the data was loaded into Synapse. Now we can load it into Power BI, and we can, I'll just import it. Could also have been direct query.
Import first, direct query second. Always good advice.
Yeah. Do you have a need for direct query? If you're not sure, then go for import.
Well, I think probably the number one thing that people ask for related to Power BI is live data. I want live data. Okay.
Yeah.
Complicated, and it has a lot of extra load. What does that mean? Well, we just want it we have a 9 a.m. meeting every day, and we want the data current by then. Okay, so you need an 8:30 a.m.
Exactly.
refresh with your data set. Yeah.
There's different meanings of live. Mm-hmm. For some people, once per hour, that means live. And if it's once per hour within those working hours, that's also live for them. So they end up doing, of course, import instead. So we made a quick data model. We could have done more. We could also have done more in the Synapse platform by denormalizing these, joining them together into one fact table instead of mixed up, or even a fact and a dim dimension table. But for now, we'll just do the plain old thing and connect the data as is. So we have a data model. Can publish it. Give it a not too bad for a download folder. That could have been worse. So give it a name here. We'll call it Supercharge demo, and publish it to the service. That was this one. And now we went from ingesting data in Synapse. We created these views on top so we could use them as SQL. We quite quickly, through Synapse, through the help we got from the platform, we could generate a template file. I mean, if you wanted to connect, it's not that hard because it's just using the SQL connector with a specific connection string that you can find in your Azure portal. So if you know your way around connecting to data, it's not a big deal. But for people who may not be very experienced Power BI users, it's very neat that you can get this quick way of connecting to your known and familiar SQL, serverless SQL thing in your platform. But now the data set is here. You can see here the Supercharge demo is here. And I think this is kind of neat that I can also now from Synapse go and create a brand new report. And we have the tables here, we have the data model. I can just try and pull in some data. We can try to do something else this time. Use some store ID versus some of the details, maybe sales quantities. Order quantity. And don't summarize. And maybe make a pretty not so pretty bar chart. But anyways, I've just created a report, and doing so in suddenly a new workflow where I kind of could do it all from Synapse, and then I could fine tune still in Power BI, but I kind of get started from within here, and I can save it, and as you would be used to, I could give it a report name, Supercharge report, spelling error doesn't matter, and it's being saved. And if I went to my Power BI, I can perhaps do that. It should be here. If I go to my Power BI, you should quickly see here that everything is within Power BI, so it's not some sort of tricks where it creates other objects. We actually created a Power BI report. We created a Power BI data set. We have the data stored in our Synapse platform. And they kind of integrate pretty neatly in this fashion.
Agreed.
So just to wrap up here, right? So there are some integrations. Here we can actually quite smoothly work from one tool and the other, and one can host the data and the other can create the reports, and you can do stuff between them. there's also things that I didn't show you today. You can connect directly to the data in the data lake. Not always the best use case, but you can do it. And one thing that I would have loved also to demo, but I unfortunately cannot do today, is that you can also use Power BI to ingest data into Azure Synapse. Data marts made this easier, not necessarily better, but you could ingest data to your data mart, pull that into your Azure Synapse, and then have something that you processed in Power BI now becomes part of your overall enterprise data platform data. That's pretty cool if you're starting to just slowly work towards the notion of small like satellites of data, people making data that could be shared with others. I don't want to say data mesh, but data mesh-ish or data mesh very, very light kind of opens up to a bit of this. But anyway, you can use data marts as a tool for this. But you could also use a regular Power BI data flow, use that, bring your own data lake functionality, and then have that up running. And actually, I cannot show you exactly to do it because I don't have administrator access on this tenant, and it's locked behind a setting. But if you had a workspace in Power BI, and you think it would be kind of nice to have access to the data within that data flow, you can go here to settings of the workspace, Azure Connections, and then under storage here, you would have an option to add your data lake as the storage for your data flows. And that's pretty neat for two reasons. The first one is you can push this data to your overall data platform. It can be shared with AI or machine learning models up in that Synapse platform. It can be shared with completely other tools, and it can be used in the enterprise data modeling, or it could be pushed to another team who would need this data. So there's great functionality, great reasons for doing this. The other one is you actually get historical data, because the data flow behind the scenes, when you have your own data lake, will generate a version of all the changes in your data over time, or some of them at least. So you get some historical data. It's not necessarily structured, but you have those snapshots you can go back and look at if you want to, for some auditing reasons or some other reasons. So I can recommend to look into this. Would love to have demoed it, but my hands are kind of tied here.
Yeah, and there's I will say as well, the one philosophy that I have with presenters and stuff is rising waters raise all ships. So there's a couple of tools that actually really help that I got from Daniel Marsh-Patrick that I'll throw to you.
Cool.
When we chat afterwards. But there's some really cool stuff with auto typing and other things that actually make like buttery smooth presentations. But yeah, I've actually been learning a good amount today, so this has been great, and I think the ability to have a data exchange both directions to and from Power BI is really fantastic. And even from the Power BI perspective, the ability for easy exporting and connecting workspaces to Azure, both Synapse and otherwise, I think allows for a lot of ingestion, not only of the data contained within the data sets, but especially telemetry data, which I think is very important for a lot of users as well, to be able to put that into Azure and then do advanced processing on it.
Yep, definitely. I also want to emphasize here that in the presentation before, we went through the end-to-end analytics of Power BI and the end-to-end analytics of Azure Synapse. I really think the big benefit happens when you make end-to-end analytics platform that has both the tools and use them where they are the strongest. So definitely Azure Synapse are by far best when it comes to ingestion, transforming, and curating that data, that raw data, that non-modeled data. But you also have tools in Power BI like Datamart now and data flows that can kind of add to that process and help with some specific use cases. I mean, I for one have met a REST API where it was much easier for me to do it in Power Query. And then there's always the question, do we spend days getting it to work in Synapse, or do we just make a quick Power Query, push it to the data lake, pick the data from there? So they synergize with each other, and that's truly where you see the benefit when you start mixing and matching. And of course, don't rely on the visualizations of Synapse, but actually use Power BI for the modeling and the visualization and the sharing.
Exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, like I get asked this a lot. Like, should I do something? Should I make a SQL view? Should I do something in Power Query? Should I outside of like where to keep the data in Power BI? And like it's the consultant always it depends, but I think it's where your skill sets lie. Like I prefer Power Query. I used to be more SQL, but as there's an easier tool to do stuff these days, and the fact that I can put it in a data flow, which can immediately dump it into Azure SQL and all sorts of stuff, I have less a need for that. So I develop it that way. But I know if I'm going to hand off to another developer that doesn't really know Power Query, or the company would prefer to have it in SQL views, I will write some myself, or I will work with someone to then ensure that most of the transformations are done in SQL, and then small baby things, column removal filtering, that's done at the final step in Power BI. But it's whomever is managing it and is keeping it there. But same with as you just mentioned, like using Synapse for other stuff is, sometimes there are reasons to upgrade and move over to a platform, but there are other times where you want to leverage existing skills, and you just knowing the audience of ownership down the road between those.
Definitely, and then for someone like you're saying, Reid, for someone who is mostly exclusively working with Power BI, who may know a bit of SQL but not necessarily very experienced, or may have touched upon Python at a time, I mean, I think this could be an inspiration to say that there are some things you could do better if you spend just like an afternoon or two toying around with these tools. Maybe you'd learn to have better historical data tracking, and maybe that actually could help you get even better insights, because imagine pulling that historical data into your reports again. That adds a whole new aspect of insights you may not have had before.
Exactly.
I did it once for some sales data, where one thing is when the expected sales date is for a given ongoing sales lead, but seeing how those dates actually move throughout the process, throughout all the sales leads, that's actually insightful as well. What are the patterns of when they're pushed forward, and salespeople kind of tend to do that, and sometimes they actually pull it in the other direction, because those patterns add new insights, but you can only get them if you have these snapshots of how did this data look at any given time, because usually those systems will override that date field every time it's updated, and not keep the past one. So there's the benefits all around.
So I got a few questions I'm going to start throwing up, because we had some good conversations that are popping in now. So the first one should be an easy one. Is will you make the deck available at all?
Definitely.
Okay. So what I would say is if you can host it on your website and give me a link, then I will put that link in the description for people to go to your site and then download it from a blog post or anything else. So that would be my encouragement. That way it directs people to your website as well.
Yeah. So I will add it to the website, and I'll just send you the link, Reid. You can
exactly. Yep. And for people tuning in, the description will eventually get updated, as well as the blog post on my site with this. So by the time you're watching this recording later, you'll have full access to that. So excellent. Okay, so a couple of other ones. So Matias had one. So what would a small company, so SMB, just entering Power BI, say from on-prem to the service, consider to go this way with any kind of Synapse integrations?
Let me just reread. So just entering Power BI from an on-prem to
basically the cloud. So it sounds like on-prem to cloud, and then what would be some selling points to encourage them to not only say purchase like cloud-based Power BI, but also consider looking into Synapse, if you were to list a couple of key selling points?
I mean, there's definitely an aspect here of you're probably in the category of companies who are least likely to benefit most from Synapse, given the size. So that being said, there are still reasons why you may want to do it anyway. I mean, if we look at maybe you can show the slide I'm sharing.
Yeah, let me. There you go.
If we're looking at these different superpowers of Synapse, the multi-language capabilities and the AI capabilities and the massive scale is probably not for you yet. They are probably leaning towards bigger compatibilities. Same for reverse ETL. Same for version control. So we're kind of back to the historical data and change tracking, something that Power BI doesn't handle.
Yeah, that's a big one.
It's something that Power BI doesn't handle. You can get that from Synapse. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, if you are in a company that are looking into growing, or in a company, it also depends when you say small company, how small that actually is. If you're a company that are serious about maturing the way you handle data in the future, you may want to slowly start exploring these tools now instead of doing a bigger migration when you hit maybe 100 employees or 150 or something like that, where you do kind of start to want to utilize some of these other capabilities. I hope it made sense.
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. At least it helped from my end. Hopefully, Matias, that was good for you as well. Let me get another one of these questions spun up.
And I think that's the answer now. I think the answer in a few years would be for the AI capabilities. That's just a prediction on my part, but I think that's going to be an increasingly more and more important use case for those kind of companies as well.
Excellent. Okay.
In the future.
And let's see, Casey Banks. Let me read this question off. So, yeah, we have a Power BI Pro license, and finding as our data sets keep growing, we also constantly keep increasing Power BI capacity from Synapse to the Power BI service. Would you have any recommendations on reducing capacity need, or the capacity needed?
So you are using Synapse, and that keeps growing, and therefore your copy of the data in Power BI also keeps growing. Is that how you also understand it?
I think so, and we can also come back to this in just a minute, Casey, if you want to clarify. Just oh, and here's one other follow-up: is we're currently evaluating Dremio and Starburst as solutions for this, and Casey said yes. So what you just described as your interpretation is correct.
So that becomes even more of a Power BI question. So feel free to also jump in, Reed. But I would say the answer would be somewhere along the lines of composite models, direct query, and maybe pre-aggregated table. I mean, see if you can move some of the model into your. I mean, that's actually one of the big selling points of using Synapse, that you have the option of using direct query on top of it. Mm-hmm. So see if there are some of the data that doesn't need to be loaded in. You often have this split in data sets where you have some of the overall most important numbers that are kind of high level, very coarse in the grain, very aggregated data, and that can definitely be loaded into the model. No problem. That doesn't take up a lot of space. And then you have all the transaction level details, like who exactly bought order number 254 or something like that. And it's not uncommon for people to want to drill down to that very lowest level. But that's where the data size of the data set explodes, because then you need to pull in the lowest granularity, or the highest, I always forget, the lowest grain, like the fine coarse, the fine grained data. And that takes up a lot of space. So if you could shift that towards maybe some direct query and keep the other one loaded in a composite model, I think that could help you out, especially because those transaction level details, usually users don't mind waiting a few seconds to have them, because if they are digging that, like drilling that much down into the data set, they're looking for very specific insights. And I think those are
and Casey's making an interesting comment right here, which is kind of the point of direct query. The data set is too big for direct query. It's most of the transactions. That's actually the exact opposite of how it's designed to be used, because import, you don't want to import too much data. If you have hundreds of millions or billions of rows, that is when you want to use direct query. So I would actually look at the database optimization, because direct query is servicing incredibly large data sets that could not be imported. That's the goal of direct query, is to not have to import that many. So I would be curious to more look at, like, has the database been in? Well, I guess this is Synapse, but what are you trying to pull in from there? Like individual record rows or anything
True.
else? I do.
True. Good point.
There's about 5 or 6 other questions, so I do want to get to some of those. Casey, we can come back to this possibly at the end of those. But do you have any closing comments based off of this? From you, Matias?
No. Let's move on. Yeah, very good point. Yeah, I don't know why I mixed those up. You're completely right. The other way around.
Let's see. Yeah, here we go. Kieran, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, what's the difference in architecture implementation between Power BI Premium and Synapse? Well, they're very different beasts. Like Premium is like large capacity data sets, but also comes with paginated reports and the deployment pipelines and, like, dozen other features related to that. So it's its own set of features and services, versus everything that you've seen here for Synapse, and more data storage and a lot of other involvements related to Azure specific features. So there is some small, I'd say, overlap in terms of large amounts of data that can be put into them, but otherwise, the Venn diagram of how much versus different, like there's only a little bit of overlap between the two in my mind.
Yeah, I think that the question is hard to answer because I would say, yeah, they cover different parts of the pipeline. So ideally, in a best practice pipeline, you would have Synapse doing some of the stuff, mostly the backend, the steps from ingesting, transforming, and making the curated data, and then Power BI handle those front end things like data modeling and serving the data to your users. So I just think the architecture of full-on Power BI only implementation or premium, it kind of, you get that squashed together data load phase where you lose out on some of the capabilities of a proper data platform.
All right, and I got a couple
of a proper enterprise data platform. Let me correct that, because I do think Power BI is a proper data platform for the right use case.
It is, agreed. I'm just looking through the. All right, yeah, this is another good one from, and I guess a follow-up to that question by Casey. But yeah, could connecting to Power BI to a semantic layer held in a data lake in Parquet format help reduce capacity need? I guess for the size of the capacity. I mean, either way, like, it would be a direct. You could do a direct query against that, yeah.
I'm not sure, actually. I wouldn't be confident. I'm leaning towards not being able to do it. I'm pretty sure it doesn't query fault either, but I am not 100% sure. I usually
you can't do it directly against a Parquet file.
No, so you go through the serverless layer, and there you could,
exactly.
could do it. But then you have the problem with the serverless SQL layer is that it is it's kind of an abstraction on top of the files. So if you want quick queries, that's not really your use case, and you usually see some of the fastest queries with the serverless being 2 or 3 seconds, and those are the fastest, and they can often run up to 10-15 seconds if they are actually have a lot of files they need to go through. And I just don't think that's compatible with direct query to have to wait 15 seconds for a query.
Exactly.
But yeah.
Let's see. I think we'll do a couple more and then start wrapping up here. I like all the questions that came through at the end, so I appreciate it.
Well, it's good questions, yeah.
Yeah. Here we go. Let's do this. When would I use Data Factory versus Synapse?
Excellent
Broad question, but yeah.
Oh yeah, great question. So, as I said earlier, Synapse is a toolbox, and it contains a lot of services, and one of them is what is called Synapse pipelines. And the part that is Synapse pipeline is equivalent to to the pipelines we have in Azure Data Factory. And there's the mapping data flows, and you have these things that are exactly the same. So you have an almost identical copy of Data Factory within Synapse Analytics. If you imagine, like we talked about the Venn diagram before, Reed. So if Synapse is the big circle, you have a data factory within that circle contained within it. Except for the small little detail that they share a common code base, I think, but they are not synchronized. So Data Factory will get features before Synapse, at least as it is now. It also has features that Synapse haven't been implemented in Synapse yet, even features that Data Factory have had for a long time. So the easy answer is here, look up those specific features. One of them is Power Query in Data Factory. Another is the new granular budgeting you can do. So a new thing in Data Factory is you can budget on specific pipelines and see exactly what do the individual pipelines cost. You can switch that on, it's a preview thing. That's not implemented in Synapse yet, and you never have that guarantee that it will be. I assume and expect it will be because it seems like an important feature. But there is this playing catch up where at Azure Data Factory is always half a step ahead and sometimes have some features that Synapse doesn't have. And then on the other hand, Synapse has the more tight integration with the other tools. So if you don't need those, if you don't have a hard need for the specific features of Azure Data Factory, go with Synapse. That's my go-to. It's almost like we talked about earlier, Reed, when you need to decide if you go direct query or import. It's almost the same thing. If you have a very, very hard, like very real need for direct query, well, that's fine. Then you should use direct query. But if you don't, and if you're unsure, start with import, because that's the go-to answer. That's the one most simple.
The most robust for sure.
Yes, and I would say the same. If you're unsure, go with Synapse. You get the tight integrations. It's and you get a bunch of other capabilities. If you have a specific need that's only in Data Factory, well, then you're obviously you go for Data Factory. But I do think they're converging more and more, and probably will in the future. But we'll have to see.
So there's a couple questions left. I want to do one more just for sake of time. We'll wrap up with this question from Mark, and then say our farewells. But this is a good one. I like this as well. So like the technical questions are great, just because there's so many scenarios for this. So I'll read it. If someone has monthly CSV files in a OneDrive folder, and the data will grow exponentially, is there a better way to store this data instead of OneDrive ingested by Power Query or data flow? Should we be using any of the tools that you discussed today?
So if someone has monthly CSV files in a OneDrive folder and data will grow exponentially.
Essentially, is instead of just I'm guessing data flow, dumping it directly into Power BI into a data flow / maybe Azure in the backend if it's in premium. Is there anything with Synapse where Synapse can ingest it first into a Parquet file or one of the other examples that you showed, and then ingest it into Power BI is how I'm interpreting that?
I would say there's no, you can do it. I mean, there's a CSV connector, and I also believe not completely. I haven't ingested data from OneDrive before. I have from SharePoint. Those are kind of sometimes
same thing in the backend.
Same thing, but slightly different at times. So your personal OneDrive, I think that would be a problem. But if it's like a shared SharePoint folder, you can ingest that in your Synapse, definitely. But you can also do it as you're doing into Power Query data flows. So there's no specific use case here that warrants one or the other, aside from what you would already choose. I mean, let me clarify. So there's nothing stopping you from picking either. So there's nothing specifically for this use case that makes me go, yeah, you should definitely use Synapse, or you should definitely stay with Power BI. So it's more of going back to that overall question: will you benefit from having a data platform that is not necessarily locked into a specific software as a service offering, one that is more open to other services, and one that is more mature in like and has these enterprise capabilities. So I don't think it's a thing you need to consider for this specific use case. More a general consideration.
I think the pipe to get from and just to wrap up the OneDrive SharePoint, technically everything is now SharePoint. Even if you have personal OneDrive, it's still dumped into a SharePoint backend. It just depends on do you have version control or anything else turned on. But either way, the repository is nowadays backend infrastructure identical. But they connect to that. However, the file is kept into any other Microsoft location for the most part. There's not going to be any performance benefits to putting it into one system versus the other. Like data flows can still push it directly into Azure Gen 2 storage. It can go into Synapse. You can ingest it out of either one of those. I actually I err on the side of Synapse can have direct query. You can also have a data flow with direct query because it is a flat file still, but it's the semantic layer built on top of that for fast connections. So I think the nuances between those are similar enough that it kind of comes down to where else you're going to use it, where it's being stored. But otherwise, it really is like a kind of a client-specific scenario for that. But it's a great question on would there maybe be any connection benefits between either or, at least for the initial ingestion.
Yeah, but you will have times you have specific file formats or specific sources or specific use cases where one is just a lot easier to work with than the other. I've seen it a lot with REST APIs. Some REST APIs are horrible to work with in Power Query. Some are horrible to work with in Azure Data Factory. So sometimes you end up saying, well, one will be easier than the other. But CSV files hit that sweet spot where it's very easy in both tools, I would say.
Yep, I'd agree. And there was a comment that actually was just answered by George, so I'll use this just as I like this summary. So because the question was from another individual, just again, I'm still confused. Why should I ever use Synapse versus Power BI? And I like the summarization.
Yeah.
It provides warehousing, data laking, processing platform, and Spark interfaces, plus a lot of other integrations with Azure, which gives it those extra benefits. Yes, they are both data storage locations, but Power BI really is just designed primarily for import of and consumption of data into just reports for the most part, where there's so many other things you can do with the data in Azure. So like it's a broader sense of like both have ingestion in, but where is it going to be used by? So that's the conversation I come in. Is it if I'm just using data for Power BI data sets, data flows and data lakes and Power BI Premium should be just fine. But if I have a lot of other things that I want to do, like I want to do machine learning or using Spark or any other integrations to process and additionally consume the data, or even in platforms outside of Microsoft, putting it into Synapse makes it much easier to do many of those.
That's an excellent point. And you're completely right, because as Power BI users, Power BI developers, we tend to kind of narrow the end goal down to those, the reports, the data sets. And you're right, by moving to a platform that's not necessarily logged into Power BI, you do open up all these sorts of new capabilities, and you also open up to learning some of these, I call them unknown unknowns. I mean, the things you didn't know and couldn't even imagine that you could utilize by doing this. So there is a bit of a leap of faith also by doing, especially as a small organization. And that's why I recommend, I mean, you don't need to hire big, huge consultancies to get started. You can do your own POC, again, get some free credits. I think you usually can get somewhere around the internet $200 in credits, and you can do a lot of work in Synapse to learn the tools for those. And I hope it will widen your horizons of what can be done.
Exactly, agreed. And I think we'll use that to wrap up as a nice little summarization at the end of this. Matias, this has been great. And for the people tuning in, I got a higher than normal amount of questions, which is really nice. I think it allows us to dive into
really good
considerations. Yeah, exactly. Especially for like a broad platform that really can do so many different things. Just to show that slide again, like lots of stuff that's related to it. This is a holding tank to really allow the connection to a lot of other stuff. So I think that was great conversations to have at the end. But yeah, Matias, thank you for coming on. It was great to see you again since Next Step, and I will be seeing you as well in just a couple of weeks here at PASS. So super excited for that as well.
Yeah, and thank you all for joining. Glad to be here, and thank you for having me, Reid, and have a good weekend.
Absolutely. And everyone else have a great weekend and see you online next week. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships or our merchandise store for cool swag. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on your social media platform of choice to help our channel grow. So, until next time.